Lecture 26, The Battle of Kosovo.
Go back with me to June the 28th, 1914, and we are with the Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his entourage. The Archduke is visiting on this day his capital city of Sarajevo in his province of Bosnia. His wife is with him, Sophie, and this is meant to be a statement of the Archduke's commitment to bring progress, prosperity, new jobs, better medical care to his Serbian subjects. And he has prepared his speeches very carefully, the speech that he will give at the town hall. And this will be a further demonstration that the Archduke is progressive, unlike his uncle Franz Ferdinand, that the Austro-Hungarian Empire can become a United States of Austria, in which each of its provinces and peoples, like the Czechs, like the Slovaks, like the Hungarians, and like the Serbs, can have autonomy, their own customs and languages respected and taught in the schools. And it is his progressive view that he believes can save the crumbling Austro-Hungarian Empire. But one member of his entourage keeps trying to just find a minute or two to talk to the Archduke. What is it, he finally says that morning? I beg your Imperial Highness one more time, do not go in celebration through Sarajevo today. What is it? Is it again about that battle or something? Yes, it is about the Battle of Kosovo, your Imperial Highness. It happened on St. Vitus Day. Look, I don't care about that battle. You know, history is really not one of my major interests. I am interested in engineering, I am interested in economics. And history just bores me. And I really have other things to do this morning than to listen to you. Please, Your Majesty, there are clear reports that terrorists are in Sarajevo, that they intend to assassinate you. And your going on this particular day is an incitement to the whole Serb population in Sarajevo. What is so special about this day? You know, when you tried to talk to me about this before, you gave me a little memorandum. I can even get straight the date. Is it June 15th or June 28th? June 15th is already passed. Your Majesty, the 28th is the Julian calendar, the 15th is the old style. The 28th is the Gregorian calendar that we use. The 15th is the old style. See, you can't even get it straight. So it's the 28th of June, their battle is long past, and I don't care about it anyway. And thus, the motorcade drives on into Sarajevo. As they are driving down the street, there are a lot of sullen faces. And a terrorist network sponsored by the police of independent Serbia, a nation that dreams of restoring its medieval empire, sponsored by independent Serbia, a terrorist network known as the Black Hand, has prepared just the assassination that the advisor of Franz Ferdinand is warning against. And as the motorcade goes along, a bomb is thrown. And when Franz Ferdinand, himself unscathed, gets to the town hall and the mayor begins his speech, Franz Ferdinand interrupts him and says, "What, can't you even give us protection in this place? What kind of outrage is this? A bomb is thrown at me when I come into this city? Well, we're going to continue with the motorcade. Nothing is going to scare me." But the driver's gotten a little confused by now, and the route has changed, and he's driving down a crowded street and suddenly runs into a dead end, starts to turn around, and standing right there eating a sandwich is Gavrilo Princip, one of the members of the Black Hand. He has been smuggled into Sarajevo with the aid of the independent Serbian police. And he was going to shoot Franz Ferdinand that day, but it didn't seem to be working out. The bomb had not worked out. And he decided to go home after having the sandwich. And there was the Archduke. And Princip turned, fired his shots, and both the Archduke and his wife were mortally wounded. The Archduke's his last words were, "Live, live for the children, Sophie." They were buried, and within weeks, the world was at war. How could a world war grow out of an incident in ancient medieval Serbian history? The war came when the Serbs were called upon by the Austrians to investigate the crime, and then Austria upped the ante. The Serbs turned to their traditional Slavic protector, the Russians. The Russians turned to the French, with whom they were allied. The German emperor gave the Austro-Hungarian emperor a blank check. And as the British Prime Minister put it, the lights went out all over Europe. And when the war was ended, 4 years later, 11 million were dead. I don't think the First World War was inevitable. I think if Franz Ferdinand had bothered to study and think about the history, the Battle of Kosovo that was fought on the 28th of June in 1389, if he had the wisdom to understand how deep these feelings flow in the Balkans, how much is tied up in ethnicity, how long these grievances are remembered, he would have waited a few weeks before he made his trip to Sarajevo. So what was the Battle of Kosovo? Kozovo Polje, the field of the Blackbirds, where on the 28th of June, 1389, the noblest army of the Serbs, led by their Tsar Lazar, came to grips with the army of the Ottoman Turks, led by the Sultan Murad. And the flower of Serbian nobility perished, and an independent Serbia would exist no more, and would be subjugated to the Turks, and down until the year 1815 would groan under the harsh, unyielding, merciless grip of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire is one of the most significant factors in the development of the modern Middle East. The Ottoman Empire grew out of the decline of Byzantine power, the empire at Constantinople. Turks had already played a major role in the history of the Middle East, serving as soldiers and as administrators in the various Arab governments of the Middle East in the Islamic period. But in 1071, a Turkish army won a major victory over the Byzantines at Manzikert in the far reaches of what we call Turkey, but it was not yet the land of the Turk. It was Anatolia or Asia Minor. The Turks come from Central Asia originally. They are related traditionally by custom, by language, in the terms of their military strength, to the Mongols, the same Mongols that were led by Genghis Khan. And various Turkish groups penetrated into Anatolia. And by 1300, one of these was the Osmanli Turks. They took their name from their war chief, Osman. The territory of Anatolia was divided between territory still controlled by Constantinople, the Byzantine Empire, and by smaller Turkish principalities. Thus, the Osmanlis took as their sphere of influence, at first, the Balkans. And the Osmanlis were a Ghazi nation. And a Ghazi is the highest title you can have in the Islamic world. It means a warrior for the faith who has sworn his life to drive out and destroy the infidel filth. And under Osman, the Turks, the Ottomans, crossed into the Balkans, captured cities like Saloniki, won a series of victories, and by 1389 were determined to push through Serbia and push further into the Balkans. Kosovo Polje, the field of the Blackbirds, was a strategic point. And the Serbian Tsar, King Lazar, knew that the Turks had to be stopped there, or they would conquer all of Serbia, they would conquer Croatia, they would march all the way, as they ultimately did, to the gates of Vienna. The Serb Empire reached its height about a generation before, under the first of its kings to bear the name Tsar, Tsar Stephen Dušan. The Serbs were, of course, Slavic by language, and in fact, there is very little difference between the Serbian language and the Croatian language, except, and this is very important, the Serbs write in the Cyrillic alphabet, the Croats write in the Latin alphabet, the Croats are Roman Catholic, the Serbs are Orthodox Catholic, and that has made all the difference through the centuries. But Stefan Dušan created a real Serbian empire, unified, ruling over parts of what we call Romania today and Bulgaria. He obtained an independent church from the bishop at Constantinople, built beautiful monasteries, and Serbian painting is one of the glories of the culture of the Balkans, being derived from the painting at Constantinople. So Stephen Dušan made Serbia into a political power and a cultural power. But after his death, weakness set in, and the Serbs were on a decline when Tsar Lazar, the name means Lazarus, the man who came back from the dead, when Tsar Lazarus took over command of the country and sought to unify it. And to him fell the task of fighting the Turks at Kosovo Polje. The two armies knew the battle was going to happen. They brought their forces, the Turkish army about 40,000 strong, the Serbian army about 30,000 strong. The Turkish army was a superb military machine. Sultan Murad was an experienced, brave, and capable general. His main forces were both cavalry and infantry. The cavalry of the Turks was descended from the Mongols. The Turkish cavalry made use of the composite bow, and the composite bow is far stronger, shoots far more distance, and can fire more rapidly than the traditional longbow. And a good Turkish archer could fire up to 18 to 20 arrows in a minute. They also carried, like the Mongols, a variety of arrows. Arrows that would kill horses at 200 yards. Arrows that would wound a man at 100 yards. Arrows that could pierce armor at 25 yards. And their method of fighting was to use the cavalry on the flanks, fire into the enemy force before it had ever come to grips with it, and so ravage the horses and the infantry of the enemy that they were not able to put up a strong, unified resistance. The Ottomans also made use of terror, and a good part of their cavalry were irregular. They were not paid, they lived entirely off of plunder, and the Osmanlis would send ahead of their main army these irregular troops to spread fire and destruction, rape and pillage. And this had already been done, and the population around Kosovo was already terrified by these attacks. In the center were the Janissaries. They were a unique Osmanli institution. Janissaries were taken from their Christian subjects. About the age of 7 to 10, the recruiting officers would go through the villages, Christian villages in Anatolia that were governed by the Ottomans, and then later on throughout the Balkans. They would take boys of 7 to 10, send them away from their homes, put them with Turkish families, learn the Turkish language, be converted to Islam, be circumcised, then brought to Constantinople for further training. They owed nothing but full loyalty to the Sultan. They wore in their hats, one, a spoon, which was a symbol of the fact that the Sultan fed them, and then a curious flap, because they were part of the order of the dervishes, a mystic order devoted to spreading the faith of Islam. They carried arrows and bows, and they were deadly with them. They too would send up a hail of arrows against an approaching army. But they were also masters of the pike. And a Janissary force would go into battle with 16-foot-long pikes. 5 pikes pointing out at one enemy soldier. And the coordination between cavalry and the infantry was superb. So this is how they would strike. First on the flanks of the enemy, causing disorder, then surrounding the enemy as far as possible, and unleash the Janissaries with their pikes. Very few armies ever defeated the Turks, and only those armies which employed these Turkish-style tactics, like the armies of Tamerlane, could defeat the Turkish army. The army of the Serbs, of Tsar Lazar, was made up of heavy cavalry. It too had archers, but using longbows. It too had infantry, but the infantry was poorly trained, not especially well armed. They were brave, but they were no match whatsoever for the Turkish infantry, the Janissaries. And the Tsar put his hope on his heavy cavalry, that they could ride through the hail of arrows, ride down the Janissaries, because not even the bravest Janissary formation could stand up against heavy armored knights, and that the Turkish army would be destroyed. The goal was also to capture Murad the Sultan, hold him for a hostage, and demand that the Osmanlis withdraw from the Serbian territory. So the battle came about. The cavalry of the Turks did tremendous damage, wreaking havoc on the lightly armed infantry of the Serbs, and even causing a great deal of loss among the heavy armored knights. When the heavily armored knights made their final charge, they began to break through on the left wing of the Turkish forces. But just at the moment when the battle could have been won, according to tradition, one of the Serb underlords, Vuk Branković, forever cursed by the Serbs, withdrew his army, his forces, leaving the flank unprotected, and the Serbs were overwhelmed. The Janissaries were merciless. Those Serbs that fled were hunted down and shot with the arrows of the irregular Turkish cavalry. And when the day came to an end, the might of Serbia was broken forever. And the Tsar lay dead on the field of battle, decapitated. But death had also come to Sultan Murad, one of the bravest of the nobles of the Serbian land. Miloš Obilić forced his way into the center of the Turkish line, told them that he was a traitor and wanted to go over to the Sultan's side, was introduced into the tent of the Sultan, and as the Sultan returned from battle victorious, Miloš stabbed him to death, giving his own life as the price. So Murad was dead as well. And the question would be, who would succeed him? Now, having a harem system, the Turkish Sultan had numerous sons, but only one son could survive. And Bayezid, the thunderbolt he was called for his bravery in battle, for the speed with which he struck, earned the name that day. He had his brother Jacob sent for, saying, not telling him that the father was dead, saying the father had instructions for him. And as soon as the brother came into the tent, Bayezid had him strangled to death. You could not shed the blood of a prince of the royal house, so he was strangled to death. And so began the Osmanli tradition that the new sultan had all of his brothers strangled with a silk cord as soon as he ascended the throne. Thus the Turks moved on into Serbia. A new czar was appointed by the Turks, Stephen Lazarevic, the son of the fallen czar, but he was an obedient and submissive subject and followed his masters wherever they told him, fought at their side, and was constantly loyal. And the glory of Serbia passed away. But it was not forgotten by the Serbs. The Serbs are masters of oral poetry. And the Serb, or what used to be called Serbo-Croatian oral poetry, has been believed by many to be full worthy to take its rank alongside a Gilgamesh, a Beowulf, even an Iliad. It was my great privilege to study Serbo-Croatian and the oral poetry with the master of that subject at Harvard, Alfred Bates Lord. He had collected a large number of traditional Serbian songs at a time in the 30s when the tradition was still alive. And a single singer of tales with a musical instrument having only one string would play and sing in a monotone of the ancient glories of Serbia. And the masterpiece of that oral poetry is the Battle of the Field of the Blackbirds, Kosovo Polje. Sultan Murad fell upon the field of the Blackbirds. He had come to conquer the land of the Serbs. He sent a message to the Tsar. No two men can rule over the same land. If you value your life, you will submit to the Turks, and we will rule you with justice as long as you pay your tribute. And having received this message of confrontation, of war, the Tsar pondered deeply. Suddenly there appeared two falcons, gray falcons, and they carried in their beaks what first seemed to be a little bird. But when it landed at the feet of the Tsar, it was Saint Elijah. And Saint Elijah had brought word from the Virgin Mother herself, all the way from Jerusalem. You have a choice, Tsar. You can build an earthly kingdom. You can conquer the Turk, or you can attain heaven. If you build a great stone church, then you have chosen. And if you wish to conquer, the hand of God will be at your side. But you could lose the heavenly kingdom. And the Tsar in his piety said, how do I show that I wish the kingdom of heaven? Build for me a church made out of silk and fine garments. Thus the Tsar chose a heavenly kingdom, the sacrifice, as Jesus had chosen it on the cross. The night before the battle, the Tsar held a great feast at his castle. There were the flower of Serbian nobility around him. The question was asked, who do you value most? I value all of you, my men. But if it's for high honor, it is Vuk Brankovic. If it is for bravery, it is Miloš, the one who would later kill the Sultan. If it is for age, it is Juk and his 9 young sons. They will bring honor to their father's old age. Vuk Brankovic said, how dare you mention Miloš? He will betray you tomorrow. I will not betray him. You, Vuk Brankovic, will betray our Tsar. You will be our Judas. So this is the Last Supper. They partake of the dark red wine. And Lazar says, I know that one of you will betray me, just as Jesus had known at the Last Supper. Several of the knights ride out, and they look out over the Turkish army. How can we ever conquer them? They are so numerous. They number in the millions. If each of us Serbian knights was a grain of salt, we could not salt their meat. Their campfires are like the stars in heaven, uncountable. That may well be, but tomorrow we fight and die for the Holy Cross and for our land of Serbia. At the banquet, the Tsar has said to his knights, whoever be of Serbian blood, whoever be of the Serbian race, whoever be of the Serbian heritage, and he fight not at Kosovo on the morrow, then let his progeny die off. Let him be left with no children. Let his land grow fallow, bringing forth neither the dark grapes nor the white wheat. Let him rust away like a worthless piece of iron. The battle came. As they marched out, the mother of the children of the brave Jugovici, the children of Jugo, marched out into battle, and the mother begged each of her 9 sons, one of you stay. But all went out to battle. And she waited along with the queen herself, the Tsaritsa. And the word came, the wings of the Blackbirds were bloodied. And they told a tale magically of the utter slaughter of the Serbian nobility. On that field, as the sun was setting, a maiden came and sought for her beloved. You will find him among the bravest. Soak your dress in his blood so that you can preserve forever the memory of our heroism and our death for the faith of Lord Jesus. The head of Lazar had been chopped off. It was lying there. In a spring it had been thrown, and his body was not far off. 40 years later, it is told, that some boys driving a cart came upon that spring, that body of water, the bones of the Serbs still rotting all on the field of the Blackbirds. But that head was perfectly preserved. And nearby was the body of the Tsar, untouched, still whole, still smelling sweetly. And when they took the head out of the spring, it ooched its way over to the Tsar's body and attached it. He had left as his final will. He wanted to be buried in the church at Ravenitsa. And there the remains of the Tsar, of King Lazar, still rest, a shrine of the holiest import to the Serbian people. Ancient history, that's what the Archduke thought. That's what many thought in the end of the 20th century when Yugoslavia began to fall apart with the rest of the communist world. The Serbs had never forgotten. We will never be ruled by Turks, they said. And in a horrible display of ethnic cleansing, the Serbs, remembering Kosovo, sought to take back their land, killing many Muslims, Albanians, and revoking the ideal of a unified Yugoslavia in favor of a mighty, warlike Serbia. And if you go to Kosovo, Polje today, to the field that NATO troops had to secure to stop this genocide, you will read on the column erected there by the Serb government, whoever be of Serb blood, whoever be of the Serb race, whoever be of Serb heritage, if he fights not on the morrow at the field of the Blackbirds, then may his progeny die off forever. May he have neither son nor daughter. May nothing grow in his fields, neither the purple grape, nor the white wheat. May he rust away like a useless piece of iron. So the myth and the history come together and still shape current events on the field of the Blackbirds.